A very lockdown narcissist. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Regular listeners know that I operate the Very series, where what I do is I analyse a range of famous and notorious individuals to demonstrate to people how this individual is a narcissist by examining a range of behaviours over a period of time and providing analysis to allow you to understand what was actually happening with regard to that person's interactions and enabling more people to understand how narcissism functions and impacts upon people. In this particular I'm not selecting somebody who's famous, but instead I've chosen an event to highlight the nature of a narcissist at work, and this appertains to the situation that has been caused by the exacerbation of the behaviour of a narcissist in lockdown and the consequential impact upon the victim. I have taken a news item from HuffPost written by Asma Day, who's highlighting the issue of one particular victim who needed to go into a women's refuge but had a problem because she actually earned too much money. And of course, this links into the considerations of what ought to be done in a no-contact situation. I'm going to go through the article and I'm going to provide alongside it my analysis as it provides greater understanding for people of what is going on, highlights the dynamic, identifies the impact upon the victim, and explains what actually is going on. Whereas Asma Day writes a perfectly acceptable piece of journalism for the purposes of highlighting this issue of domestic violence and the impact of somebody trying to get away from the perpetrator and the difficulties faced in doing so. What it doesn't do is go deeper in terms of the actual dynamic and what is affecting the behaviours, and therefore I'm going to provide that further analysis. The article begins by explaining as follows. Trapped in a house with her abusive and manipulative partner, Mina knew lockdown was going to be the final straw for her. COVID was a pressure cooker which made everything more extreme and happen more quickly, the 30-year-old explained. I could feel myself slipping away, and I knew if I didn't leave, I would die. This is a common sentiment of victims, whereby they recognise that they are being steadily eroded, that they face ongoing abuse at the hands of a perpetrator without knowing precisely what is going on. Mina already had plans to escape to a refuge, but she faced an obstacle she hadn't counted on: money. Mina has identified that she needs to escape her abuser, eminently sensible, and has made plans to do so and get herself to a refuge, which would be, of course, a step with regard to a no-contact regime. It's commonly the case that many people, when they realise that they're dealing with a narcissist, understand that they must impose no contact, and they face often considerable difficulties in doing so, occasioned by their circumstances, which are exacerbated by, one, the behaviour of the narcissist in either preventing the escape or hoovering thereafter to draw the individual back in, and also the impact of emotional thinking. Emotional thinking is occasioned by the addiction that the victim has to the narcissist. The addiction wants to be fed, and it creates this emotional thinking so that it obscures a logical response, and it results in people doing things which they think are appropriate but aren't, flawed logic. It also engenders certain feelings and sensations, causing people to act on them so they continue to interact with the narcissist. For example, being angry with the narcissist so they confront the narcissist, or feeling sorry for the narcissist, feeling guilty for thinking about leaving or indeed leaving so that they don't. In Mina's situation, her salary as a teacher meant that she'd be expected to pay £350 a week for space at a shelter. But like many women in her situation, the article explains, Mina was being financially controlled, as well as suffering emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Here we have a quadruple range of manipulative behaviours which are being utilised by the narcissist to assert control over Mina. Financial control, which is relatively common, emotional abuse, done as a form of control, physical abuse as a form of control, sexual abuse as a form of control. All of those 4 instances are part of the narcissist asserting control over Mina and drawing fuel from her, and, of course, the other prime aims of character traits and residual benefits. The residual benefits from those abusive behaviours would, of course, keeping her in situ so that she provides within the household, attends to domestic chores, provides sexual release for the narcissist, and, of course, the commandeering of her money, asset appropriation being a common step of a narcissist and done out of a sense of entitlement and a failure to recognise boundaries. Mina explains, "I knew I was ready to be rid of him, but even though I had not access to my own money for 9 years, I earned too much to go into a refuge." Mina, who lived in the West Midlands of the United Kingdom, could not get housing benefit as she had her teaching job, but her former partner had taken financial control over her earnings from an early stage. It's evident that Mina is an intelligent and articulate individual. However, notwithstanding this, the behaviour of the narcissist, which you will come to hear about shortly, and of course her own addiction to this individual resulting in the emotional thinking, has meant that she handed over, in effect, financial control, providing her with a difficulty, so that she was earning but she couldn't actually access the money, and therefore she faced a double whammy. She couldn't access her own money, which is an asset that she needed, but the fact that she was earning precluded her from getting a spot at a shelter. The article explains that her story is not unique when it comes to women facing difficulties in accessing refuge accommodation. Refuge spaces are always in demand, and the pandemic has made the situation worse. As I have explained in my books, The Narcissist in COVID-19 and The Narcissist in COVID-19 Lockdown, this provides more information for you to understand how the pandemic and lockdown has impacted upon the narcissist and, in turn, our victims. Funding a refuge place is an issue affecting those suffering abuse, particularly if they are working, but being subjected to economic abuse by their controlling partner. Refuges presently operate in a way that disadvantages women in full-time employment who are not in receipt of housing-related benefits, explains Dr. Nicola Sharp-Jeffs, Chief Executive Officer of charity Surviving Economic Abuse. Many working women cannot afford to pay for a refuge place and have to give up employment so that they can claim state benefits which will fund a refuge place. It can therefore be hard for women who are working to secure a refuge place as the cost can be too high, therefore creating an incentive to leave employment. These two matters are hurdles to an individual leaving an abuser, leaving the narcissist, and of course their own emotional thinking will seize upon this for the purposes of seeking to prevent them from leaving by making them feel anxious about these steps, by exacerbating fear, because this is what the emotional thinking does. It doesn't want the individual to leave the narcissist, stop interacting with the narcissist, because that will starve the addiction. So when a hazard, an obstacle, a boundary comes up with regard to going no contact, the emotional thinking will use that and cause the victim to become preoccupied, often seeing it in a way that is taken out of context from a particularly difficult perspective. The article continues. Mina came to the United Kingdom from the Netherlands for university and met her former partner soon after her arrival. It was a whirlwind romance. Another term, of course, for the love bombing that occurs. The need to assert control over the victim as quickly as possible, driven by the narcissism and the need to secure somebody for the provision of the prime aims. Mina admits he was very charming and reeled me in very quickly. They moved in together only weeks later. Common tactics of a narcissist, the utilization of charm to dazzle the victim, reeling the individual in very quickly, no doubt through compliments, flattery, the provision of great sex, promises, future faking, and of course then the lack of boundary recognition, lack of emotional empathy, and the sense of entitlement exhibited by moving in together only weeks later. Of course, Mina, evidently an educated woman, doesn't see what is actually occurring in terms of realizing that she's being ensnared by a narcissist, and goes along with moving in together, no doubt thinking, well, I've met such a wonderful man, he's really exciting, interesting, and lovely, why shouldn't I take this opportunity? The red flags are not being heeded. Mina explained, I was not very confident and easily led. Before I knew it, he had picked out a house for us to live in, assertion of control, and started suggesting which job I should do, assertion of control, lack of boundary recognition, and orchestrating any major moves in my life, lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, assertion of control. Mina remembers alarm bells ringing at his behaviour at an early stage, but she ignored them. She saw some of the red flags, probably not realised what they actually meant, and, of course, is often the case, ignored them. She continues, his reactions were disproportionate. He would go mad about things. But initially his anger wasn't aimed at me, but at technology or other people. This is a red flag. That the disproportionate response, because something has threatened this narcissist's control, either through challenge, fuel, or wounding, has resulted in him lashing out in a way whereby his fury that is ignited is evident. Notice, however, that she talks about how his anger wasn't actually aimed at her. She didn't experience the fury, and therefore, even though she saw that this gentleman had a hair trigger, she, of course, put it down to being the fault of other people and reference technology, probably because he would smash his iPhone up if he couldn't get a Wi-Fi signal or something like that. And because it wasn't directed at her, although she was seeing something problematic, her emotional thinking essentially was whispering in her ear, don't worry about it, it's directed at them, not you. The article continues. The first time he raped her was only a couple of months after they met, following an argument. This is a very early devaluing act, and this may well have been the case that either she had not been embedded as the intimate partner primary source, or more likely that she had done something which had threatened control, of course, not knowing that it would happen this way, and certainly not on the basis that would ever justify being raped. But that is the reaction of this narcissist to visit her with considerable sexual violence through rape as a means of asserting control, drawing fuel, and an assertion of control against her. A very swift devaluing act, and it would appear that on the basis that she was the intimate partner primary source, she entered devaluation very quickly. She continues to state, the gaslighting then came very quickly. People who I cared about, he would say, they don't really care about you. Isolation of the individual in order to remove her from interfering from the perspective of the narcissist, external sources which would threaten his control. Messing with her reality, which as you all understand is gaslighting. And this is done to assert control over her and remove her from potential threats to his ability to control her. The article continues, Mina was at university as well as working around 40 to 60 hours a week, juggling 3 different jobs. Then at home, she would have to do all the housework too. He made me work all those hours, and every month I would deposit my wages into his account. Lack of emotional empathy in terms of making her work so much as well as study. Lack of emotional empathy by making her do all of the housework, where he sits there and doesn't lift a finger. Lack of emotional empathy occasioned by commandeering her money. This also shows a lack of boundary recognition, a sense of entitlement, and lack of accountability. Mina explains, he said it was because he was better at finances, and told me I was doing the housework as I was so bad at it and needed it to get better. Arrogance, grandiosity, the assertion of control, insult and belittlement. He completely manipulated me, she explains, but outwardly he was very outgoing and charming in public, operation of the facade. Only months later, the physical violence began, and Mina was punched in the stomach and face. Physical violence, assertion of control, lack of boundary recognition. When people at work saw bruises on her face, she lied and said it was an accident. "I was always defending him," she said. "There is an incredible amount of shame. I felt that if I admitted I was suffering abuse and still stayed, then I would be the biggest idiot in the world." This is clearly not a logical response, but one which is a flawed logic. This is the effect of emotional thinking, causing Mina to think that because she can't leave, although she could have done, although she understandably found it very difficult, the problem that arises is that she believes that she can't leave. Then, because she's still being abused, the emotional thinking causes her not to tell people that she's being abused, because of course, if that were to happen, they might rescue her from this individual. So the emotional thinking, not wanting her to be removed from the narcissist, causes her to apply flawed logic, namely, I will feel like an idiot if I admit that I'm being abused and I still stay. She continued, "I knew for myself I was the biggest idiot, but I didn't want anyone else to think that about me." Also note how she was defending her abuser, a common response as a consequence of the presence of the emotional thinking. Whenever Mina came close to leaving, her former partner would use crazy, flamboyant gestures to win her back. Preventative hoovering. The more awful things got, the more I would jump at any sign of affection, as I was just so starved of it. Again, this is the presence of emotional thinking and the manipulative tool of the narcissist. If Mina were operating with logic, she would realize that 1, this was a manipulation, and 2, that it doesn't matter that this small bit of affection is given, and she would also realize, dealing with the narcissist, of course it wasn't genuine, that she'd realize that even that small bit of affection is not worth the price of all of the abuse that goes around it. But of course, she's very much in the grip of the abuser. Her emotional thinking will be extremely high, so she doesn't see it for what it is. Mina left him twice, but he won her back within weeks with false promises. These will have been initial grand hoovers, utilizing future faking and promise gain. She finally found the courage to believe in herself when a friend took her aside and expressed concern about her self-esteem. Mina broke down in tears. Gradually I started believing in myself. I already knew it wasn't right, but I realized I didn't deserve this. It is often the case that an intervening individual proves the catalyst for the relevant person to take the appropriate steps to get out and stay out. By this time, Mina was working as a teacher. In November 2019, she confided in her boss, who gave her a burner phone and urged her to keep in touch. Again, another intervening factor. "I had no money and no access to a phone," admitted Mina. "I had 5 laptops when I was with him, and he broke them all. Destruction of property, form of manipulation, assertion of control. He broke my mobile phone a few years earlier, and I had no access to funds as he held all accounts by then. Assertion of control, destruction of property to manipulate, isolation. When my boss gave me the mobile phone, I hid it in a box of clothes and would text her. I was terrified he would discover it, but it also made me feel I was not entirely alone." Mina already knew she needed to leave, but in February 2020, she became ill with COVID-19. Once she had recovered, even though she was a key worker, her former partner wouldn't let her go to work, telling her she was too weak. This is, of course, the assertion of control, and it will be false compassion. He began working from home too, and life became unbearable. Mina was banished to a room in the house with bare floors and dodgy electrics. Lack of emotional empathy, assertion of control, sense of entitlement. I would make him angry for not doing something the way he wanted or quickly enough. The repercussions would be no shower, no food, and locking me into the room and telling me I wasn't even allowed to go to the toilet. Her everyday actions, of course, would result in a threat to the narcissist's control, either by challenge, fuel, or wounding, although, of course, Mina wouldn't understand what this was, because she didn't know who she was dealing with. His fury was ignited, and as a necessity of asserting control over her, he would do so by depriving her of basic human needs of no showering, no food, locking her, keeping her captive in the room, and not even allowing her to go to the toilet. All assertion of control, lack of emotional empathy, response to the threat to control. Faced with an impossible choice, Mina decided to return to her native home in the Netherlands, even though it meant leaving behind a job she loved. "My first choice would have been to go into a refuge," she admitted, "but I couldn't afford to. So one of my bosses who helped me a lot suggested, why don't you go to your family?" On Easter Monday, Mina texted her boss at the school asking if she could come in the following week as she needed technology to arrange to leave. She then lied to her former partner that her sick note had run out and the doctor wouldn't give her another one, so she needed to go into school. On the morning she left, she'd refused to give her money he had refused to give her money for a bus or fix her bike. Assertion of control, lack of emotional empathy, asset appropriation. So she secretly packed some clothes and sentimental items and walked the 2-hour journey to work. Her boss arranged hotels and travel for her to return to the Netherlands and wrote a letter explaining why she was travelling during the national lockdown. Shortly before she fled, Mina managed to get back one of her bank cards from her abusive partner after he threw it at her in a rage. Interesting point here that naturally she will have inadvertently done something to threaten his control. Therefore, in asserting control, his fury is ignited. He was no doubt being abusive, shouting at her, insulting her, and throws the bank card at her. And this exemplifies, because this will be an unaware narcissist, part of the way that the narcissism operates, namely, in order to assert control over in the moment by throwing a bank card at her, the narcissism isn't then thinking about the collateral consequence, namely, the narcissist has actually given her something which will later erode his control. The article continues. However, there was only about £1 in the account. Mina's boss drove to the bank where she was given a £1,000 emergency payment after explaining her situation. Her employer also arranged to keep her job open, meaning she was paid for a few months after she left. Mina is now back in the Netherlands, reunited with family and working in a school. Initially, I didn't want to leave the United Kingdom as my career and life were there. But I am now happy and didn't know life could be this good. Without a shadow of a doubt, without coronavirus, he would have followed me to try to bring me back. I was isolated for so long, a common manipulation, but now, despite the pandemic, I never feel lonely. Mina was supported by the charity Women's Aid throughout her ordeal. She says the charity listened to her, even when she wasn't ready to leave. Just having someone to talk to without being judged helped. Women's Aid also provided information and phone numbers on the day I finally left and got in touch with refuges, although that was not a possibility for me. Mina feels scared for women who are still with abusive partners now during yet another lockdown, particularly if they are told they need to pay for a refuge, but they can't. Sarah Davidge, data manager at Women's Aid, told HuffPost UK that economic control is a huge part of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is about control, correct, and isolating someone, correct, and restricting their freedom and choices, correct, she said. That is exactly what lockdown restrictions are doing. Perpetrators are very clever and will adapt and use anything for control and manipulation. Indeed, that is correct. Although they aren't necessarily very clever in the sense of intelligence, the narcissism operates in that way. And in a way, it would be better to state that perpetrators are very effective and the narcissism will adapt and use anything for control and manipulation in order to achieve the prime aims. Davidge said some perpetrators are using the virus to abuse people by either refusing to abide by restrictions and bringing people back to the home, coughing or spitting on them, or forcing them to live under overly strict measures and constantly making them wash their hands. Again, these are all forms of control, as part of the assertion of control being one of the prime aims. For Kim, currently living in London with her abusive partner during the latest lockdown, finances are one of the reasons she feels she can't leave. But for her, it's because she feels guilt as the main earner. Notice here how the empathic trait of honesty is being corrupted to make her feel guilty. The 29-year-old, whose name has been changed to protect her identity, revealed, "I earn most of our income, and he has so many mental health issues that I feel I can't leave him stranded." This again is a common response of the empathic victim. No doubt, notwithstanding the fact that this individual is being abused, and she recognises that she should get away from this person, she feels that she can't because of this sensation of guilt. This is the corruption of that empathic trait of honesty, which is creating flawed logic. Logically, she ought to go. Kim continues by stating, "I know he's manipulating my emotions and I'm so unhappy, but I just can't bring myself to put myself first after putting him first for such a long time. I doubt myself every day and feel like earning income is the only strength I have left. I am respected by my colleagues, yet I am completely controlled at home, including with finances. I spend all my earnings on him, his addictions, and our bills. I am so caught up, I don't know how to untangle myself." Helen Victoria, founder of Living Liberté, a social enterprise which aims to prevent future abuse by educating young people in the West Midlands about spotting the red flags of abuse, was in an abusive and controlling relationship herself between the ages of 15 and 23. She is currently supporting Kim and other women trapped in abusive relationships. Finance is a key player in why some of them feel they cannot leave, she said. Some are financially controlled by their abusers, leaving them with no confidence or resources to be independent. Again, asset appropriation and the use of finances to control is a common manipulation utilised by narcissists in order to achieve the prime aims. Miss Victoria continues, others have had to give up their work due to the abuse they received for wanting to earn for themselves, leaving them in debt or entirely dependent on their partner. For some, their abusive partner relies on the victim's income, sense of entitlement, asset appropriation, and they feel manipulated to stay in order to not feel selfish. Again, of course, this isn't being selfish. Logically, it's not. But this again demonstrates the presence of emotional thinking, causing an individual to feel that they should stay in the face of continuing abuse. Kat, who supports women through Women's Aid Live Chat Service, says that demand is busier than ever. If a woman is self-isolating, we are hearing of abusers going out and flouting the rules, sense of entitlement, no sense of accountability, and spitting on them, assertion of control, and mocking them, belittlement, for following the lockdown measures. The longer it goes on, the more bleak it feels. Being in an abusive relationship is like being in lockdown, and abusers are thriving off it. Indeed, so long as a narcissist is able to keep an intimate partner primary source with them, and lockdown has made this a lot easier for most narcissists, this exacerbates the problem for the victims. For Mina, now free of domestic abuse, the message to women facing the situation she once was in is one of hope. However bad your situation and how lonely you feel, you're not alone. There is always a way out. It may not be straightforward, and it will definitely be the hardest thing you do, but it is not too late, and the rewards you get on the other side are incredible. As I invariably explain to individuals that consult with me, there is always the ability to impose no contact and to get out. As Mina has stated, it may not be straightforward. There will be hurdles. Not everybody has those hurdles, and some hurdles are greater than they actually are because of the presence of emotional thinking, causing the individual to see things from a perspective which is more problematic for them, driven by fear, anxiety, dread, as a consequence of the behaviours that they've been exposed to, and the corrupting factors caused by emotional thinking. This article is a useful one because it demonstrates a different array of manipulations that are utilised as a consequence of the lockdown and the problems faced by relevant victims in order to go no contact, to apply the principle of go so, get out and stay out. Note again, however, that the matter of narcissism is never mentioned to demonstrate the pathological behaviour that is underpinning all of the abuses that are there, and that my analysis has demonstrated repeatedly the various aspects of the narcissistic dynamic very clearly. And yet, so many people are still completely unaware of what they were really dealing with. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.